the Senate essentially filibustered the Fast Track Authority, and then President Obama brought a bunch of corporatist Democrats into the White House and said, really, guys, come on.
Said mean things about Elizabeth Warren.
Yes, indeed. And then they got a deal in place where there would be a separate vote on the other provisions that have been tied into the to the Fast Track Authority, things like currency manipulation bill, things like special preference for the African continent on some issues, one or two others. And so as of yesterday, at least the procedural hurdle, in other words, debate has been closed on whether to go forward with the vote for the Fast Track Authority.
You got those 10 or so pro-trade Democrats.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, pro-trade I also think is sort of a misnomer, too.
I
don't like the framing on that.
Let's call it pro-this crappy trade bill.
Exactly. Okay. And we're going to see.
I'm for trade.
Now,
I'm not for trade where capital can move freely anywhere and labor can't, or where we don't, that makes it so that the whole thing is a joke. I'm also, obviously environmental things. I think we should trade with people because we should engage other countries, and that's one of the ways you do it. But you don't throw your economy out the window as part of that.
Well, and also, we also really, I think in the case of the TPP, we're really destroying our regulatory structure. And I want to move on to this story that about the Volker rule and the implications of that. But your Senator Portman is basically saying that he is going to raise an amendment to include in the Fast Track Authority the currency manipulation essentially bill that is now going to get its own vote. It's unclear whether or not that will muck things up, but the real fight is going to end up being in the House.
Portman saying he's going to support that now?
Well, he's saying he's going to make sure that it's in the.
He's hysterical. I mean, this is the guy that was Bush's trade rep. The guy's never met a trade deal he doesn't like. But
of
you
course.
know what? When polls start showing him losing to his Democratic opponents here, which they do,
that's what that's
nobody
about.
knows who the hell he is. He's scared as hell right now because he knows he can easily be portrayed as just the corporate kiss-up that he is.
You got Strickland outpolling Portman now, is my understanding. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true. That is exactly right.
So that explains why he's doing that, and he knows that amendment's going to fail. He's going to raise it. That amendment probably failed because of those 10 Democrats who have agreed to go the other route. But the real fight's going to be in the House. And it really is going to be a function, I believe, because I think, look, the number of Democrats you're going to get that are going to defect, I think is going to be fairly minimal. And I don't know how fluid that is. The real question is how many
from voting for it.
Yes. I mean, yeah, exactly.
I'm interested to see that because, the Progressive Caucus, who in times past, and I don't want to disparage them. I think that they've done the best they can under certain circumstances, and they haven't been as tough sometimes as some of us would like. But I think the culture has changed, and they were much more isolated in the past in a way that they're not now. And so I'm interested to see if 20 or 30 of them could stand up and not vote for this, because if they could, I think the thing could go down potentially.
It really is a function of how many Republicans also sort of, I guess, defect.
That's what I mean.
I
think Republicans worried about Tea Party challenges from the right. There's a decent number of them who are going to vote against this thing, and some who just, really do believe the conspiracy stuff, not the legitimate things wrong with this. The conspiracy, the kind of like the UN will be taking over the country kind of crap. So welcome on this issue.
But let's talk about this one thing that is one thing that Elizabeth Warren said about this deal is that this could actually, because of the nature, and we've talked about it quite a bit on this program, and on Monday we got a tech day here, but we're going to play an interview that I did for Ring of Fire with Dean Baker, and about sort of the regulatory structure and the investor state board that determines these things. On Wednesday, Canadian Finance Minister Joe Oliver gave a speech in New York, and he was basically saying that the Volker rule, which of course is a big part of the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial regulations, violates NAFTA. Now, the Volcker rule basically says you can't, says to U.S. banks, you can't speculate in securities for your own profit. Like you're not in that business anymore. You can broker for your clients, but that's it. And if the government is going to backstop your funds.
Yes.
Now, banks, however, U.S. banks are allowed to hold U.S. government debt in their own accounts because that's obviously a much safer investment. Those same banks aren't allowed to trade in Canadian government debt. Canadian government debt. And the Canadians say, well, that is not allowed under the rules of NAFTA. You cannot favor the U.S. Treasury notes versus the Canadian Treasury notes. Now, the U.S. Treasury says no. Canada could bring an action to basically an arbitration board set up by NAFTA and fight this. And in which case, it would either overturn that part of the law or they would somehow, I don't know, give them financial compensation. Now, Canada may decide not to pursue this. Under the TPP, it wouldn't just be the offending government that would be able to pursue this. It would be the Canadian banks. And it could be any other bank that felt that they were being prohibited. So the TPP gives even that much more power to corporations. And in this instance, you could see basically something like Dodd-Frank more or less be, if not overturned, the U.S. government would have to pay to maintain enforcement of Dodd-Frank.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to pay a fine to do that. That's exactly right. So, I mean, that's a big problem that many of us have with this that I think, the president is just choosing to kind of brush off and pretend isn't there. I don't know what else to say about that. The argument is almost just like, it's not what you say it is. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And it's kind of like, well, it's there in the text. Obviously, most people can't see that, aren't allowed to. So that's a big problem. And that, I feel like this is where this whole fight gets bogged down, which is clearly if you felt comfortable with all this stuff, you'd just put it out there. And it's sort of like, I don't know what the end goal is here, because I really don't. I have to believe that looking at this, if you've learned anything from the past, you can't believe that this thing is going to work. And the whole, just trust me, I'm the president now, it's different. That act has kind of gotten old.
Did you read Matt Taibbi's piece on this? Because he thinks that the idea of attacking Elizabeth Warren personally and sort of attacking the left, all the hippie punching is really to distract from this, and is really as a way of sort of that this is a conscious effort that they made. This is part of their strategy. We're going to sort of like sister soldier the left on this as a way of sort of triangulating and getting the Republicans on board.
I haven't read Taibbi's piece, although now you've got me interested in reading it. That makes a lot of sense. I think there's a number of sort of things you can do with that. One is, the exact kinds of Republicans who you want on board, your Chamber of Commerce types, are going to enjoy the most if you're beating up on Elizabeth Warren and being on the opposite side on something like that. So some that maybe are a little scared of Tea Party pressure and some other kinds of pressure, that I think that's partially a way of winning them over. But as with all attacks, when you attack an individual, then you make them have to defend themselves as opposed to coming after the deal. You know what I mean? It
also opens up, though, it seems to me, not just a space for the Chamber of Commerce, but people who are sort of like marginally, like, they want to demonize Obama, but they also want to demonize the left. And so it's sort of a
the ones who are personally inclined to be Chamber of Commerce types, but would be scared maybe otherwise because they'd have the Tea Party going after them. And so now they can say, look, see, I'm voting against Elizabeth Warren, must be good, that kind of thing. So the ones who really want to vote for this, and let's be honest, that's probably the majority of them. But some of them who run on social issues and come from, more evangelical, more rural districts, places where people are more against these kinds of things, which are a lot of Republicans, at the very least have to worry about a primary potentially. You already have that happening with a couple of Republicans. We've got people stepping out to primary them, and we saw what happened with Eric Cantor. And they did certainly. And so I think there, not to mention a number of people in the Senate, but certainly that was the Cantor one for those in the House, I'm sure is fresh on their minds. So they need that. They need to have Elizabeth Warren. She's now famous enough that she's a good foil.
Right.
So yes, if the foil is somebody else, Jeff Merkley or something, well, not as many people have heard of him. That doesn't really work as well. Where Elizabeth, so I do think that that's part of it. I think that's part of it. I think putting the left on the defense, so people have to sit there and respond to the charges and repeat the same crap, and aren't as free to go on offense. I mean, I think this is all a part of it. And so he's chosen to make this a really big deal. And I mean, there's a cynical view of Obama doing this because he's coming out of office soon, and what opportunities he'll have. He'll have opportunities no matter what. So I'd be a little shocked if he's doing it just for that. I just don't get, I think he's doing it more because he thinks legacy, in the way Bill Clinton can still say he passed NAFTA. But in the end, as history's gone on, that's not necessarily been looked at by many who as a good thing. I mean, there's people that will hate Clinton no matter what he did on the right, but a lot of people who would be more inclined to like Clinton or who've seen the effects of NAFTA don't like what he did as much. And I don't see why they don't. Is it better to have something passed, even if it's something that people often say, wow, that really finished off our manufacturing sector, didn't it? I don't know. But
well, it's interesting. The Dylan Matthews, I think it is, in Vox, had a piece critical of Bernie Sanders' perspective on this, that it is because he's basically saying, like, look, this is going to open up opportunities for other countries. Labor force is going to raise their standard of living. And, and if you're really concerned about poverty, they're poor too. But I mean, I think,
But are there labor standards in this? Because I've seen none. It doesn't. I mean, if this really did raise the standard of living in some of these other countries in an equitable way, that would be one thing, and then we'd have an argument we'd have to have, right? It might hurt Americans in certain ways, American workers, but maybe if it helped workers in other countries to rise up, which is better for our foreign policy, it's better for a variety of things. But that's not what's happened. It's helped those at the top in other countries. It's helped oligarchs, but the people who are still making pennies, an hour, it's not helping them. I mean, so
well, I mean, look, this is what we do know. We do know that 80% of the countries involved in this right now already have essentially free trade with the United States or are under some type of free trade agreement. A. B, we don't really know what is in the deal, so we can't really measure how much it's going to help other countries. See, like you. But
let's be honest. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off. I'll let you finish. But let's be honest. When something is negotiated in private by a group of people who tend to mostly be millionaires and have a specific set of interests, let's be honest.
So cynical. Cynical, Cliff.
I know.
I mean, look at how well it's been for Mexico, right? I mean,
they have no problems there now.
Millions
awesome.
of campesinos off of small farms. Mexican corn is 50 cents more expensive than an American ear of corn. It has, I don't know to what extent NAFTA inflamed the drug wars down there by putting a lot of young men out of, desperately looking for jobs. It certainly
also
drove a lot of people across the border.
A little more to some of them getting to other places to be able to sell those drugs for a lot more money, like parts of our country.
Yeah, well, it also drove a lot of people out of the country to look for work. I mean, so I don't know. I'm not able to measure that part of it. But the real issue here is a whole set of regulatory structure that I know is not necessary to achieve that goal. And, I don't know. When I see criticism like that, it is one of those things that I find really annoying about this is that, like, okay, yeah, there are policy arguments here, but let's be honest. Like you say, we don't have the opportunity to see these documents. And so it really becomes down to it really comes down to a sheer political fight. And so to say like it's unfair to make this about the middle class, where there's no evidence that the middle class is going to pay for at least the sort of the idea of jobs shifting somewhere, right? Is intellectually dishonest, is also in and of itself just BS, because this isn't about that. If it was about that, we would have access. There'd be some symmetry to the information here. The information would not be just in the hands of the corporations that were involved in these negotiations. So I find criticism like that to be very disingenuous and really missing the point.
And when you've been around long enough, not to say that we're old, Sam, we're just hitting our stride. But when you've seen a few of these things and you've learned that anything that is not debated in a completely transparent atmosphere, whether it's how cops are going to treat criminals or often non-criminals on the street, whether it's how we're going to conduct a war in a foreign country, whether it's an energy meeting with Dick Cheney or a trade deal or anything else, how we should handle prisoners for the CIA. When it's, granted, the CIA can't really just debate most things out in the open, but it could have done a better job than it did in terms of who was included on that list. These are things, that's the whole theory behind democracy, is transparency, everybody having understanding and being able to vote on things leads to the right conclusion. Whereas is that always true? Not necessarily, but what we do know is when things are argued behind closed doors with very specific interests present and not other people, we know how human nature works.